You like it that way? The country divided, full of hatred, invective?
No, not at all. Our relationship with the European Union has changed.
Theresa May had a deal. Wasn't perfect, but it would have delivered Brexit.
And what will this extension achieve? What is another 3 months going to achieve?
Here in London, it's still all about Brexit. Boris Johnson has shut down a fractious and angry Parliament, but not before MPs managed to do him serious damage, denying him a date for next general election and forcing him by law to seek another Brexit extension from the EU if he can't get a deal by October the 19th. My guest here this week is Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP and leading Brexit supporter. Will Boris Johnson now obey the law that Parliament has put in front of him? Andrew Bridgen, welcome to Conflict Zone. One of the biggest obstacles preventing a deal between Britain and the EU is the Irish backstop, the so-called insurance policy to keep an open border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. The government has promised new proposals. Where are they?
Well, I think they're already out there. Alternative arrangements have been discussed for over 12 months. A trusted trader scheme for regular trade. It's actually a relatively small amount of trade that goes across the border, about £2.5 billion a year.
Yeah, but
exemptions for small traders and checks away from the border.
But August 21st, the Prime Minister said in Berlin, standing beside Angela Merkel, "You rightly say the onus is on us to produce those solutions." He hasn't produced any since then. Why not?
Well, I think to an extent, the Irish border issue is a conflated issue in my view. Before the Irish border became a stick with which to beat the UK government during these negotiations.
I don't want to go into the background, I just want to know where the proposals are.
Well, the proposals are, the proposals are old proposals. They were out there a few months after the referendum. There was a joint statement by the head of HMRC Northern Ireland and Customs Excise south of the border, which said the current infrastructure on the border was quite sufficient to deal with any outcome.
And there are plenty of people who've said it isn't. Look, the Prime Minister is playing politics with this issue, isn't he? He calls the backstop anti-democratic. Let's not forget that he actually voted for that backstop in the withdrawal agreement in May, just 4 months ago, the third time it was put out to vote. So did Dominic Raab.
I didn't.
So did Dominic Raab. So did the leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, leading light of your European research group, who said, if we take this deal, we are legally out of the EU, it restores our independence. That's what you wanted, for heaven's sake, restoring your independence. If the backstop wasn't so terrible 4 months ago, why is it terrible now?
I think they were looking at the lesser of the evils. I think they could see that Brexit was slipping away potentially, and it was Theresa May's deal or no Brexit. I didn't hold to that opinion. The fact was that Theresa May put a job on the line and said, if you back my withdrawal agreement and get it through, I will stand down and let someone else take over the negotiations about the future relationship.
The fact is,
that was a flawed argument in my case.
Your people have pretty elastic principles. One moment it's okay, then the next moment it's not. So they're playing politics with it. It's not a matter of principle, is it?
It is for a large number of us. I think that probably Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, obviously with hindsight, they will have regretted voting for the withdrawal agreement at MV3. At the end of the day, that was never a deal that was it never got more than 15% support by the public, and they didn't actually know much about it.
But the fact is, you don't want a deal at any price, do you?
I do want a deal.
Amber Rudd, the minister who just resigned, asked for reassurances that the government was working on a deal. She didn't get them. She directly contradicted the Prime Minister's promise that he was 100% focused on getting a deal.
Absolutely, but
she contradicted that. She said the updates I've been grateful to receive have not provided me with the assurances I sought.
I think Amber Rudd's position on EU membership and the withdrawal agreement and the negotiations are well known.
That doesn't mean she's telling a lie, does it?
But she's telling it from her perspective.
She's seen the papers.
Well,
she's seen the cabinet papers. She knows it's not happening.
But surely anyone who's ever negotiated anything, Tim, knows that with a walkaway position, the more you prepare for no deal, and I said this consistently for over the last 3.5 years, the more the government prepared for no deal and publicly let that be known, the less likely we were ever going to need it. It is unfortunate that so much time was wasted going down the blind alley of the withdrawal agreement with under Theresa May.
We'll come on to that in a moment. But with Boris Johnson, it's about trust, isn't it? And Boris, he doesn't score highly on that, does he?
Well,
this is the man who announced in July that the EU was stopping Britain from having free ports. We could do free ports, he said. It would be a massive boost to this economy. We don't because of our membership of the EU. Utter nonsense, isn't it?
Well, if we actually sign the withdrawal agreement, we actually would be giving away the powers over state aid and those sort of tax discounts. We're giving a veto to the European Union.
My point is, why talk about free ports like that when that's simply not true?
Well, if we'd signed the withdrawal agreement, we would have been under a veto on our state aid rules.
Mr. Bridgen,
but we
there
would
are
have
more
no.
than
We would
80
have had
free ports across the EU, most of them in new member countries. What Mr. Johnson also didn't seem to know was that until 2012, when the legislation that established free ports expired here in Britain, there were free port areas in Liverpool, Southampton, Tilbury, Sheerness and Prestwick Airport. But he didn't know any of that. So this is the kind of nonsense that comes from the government is visited on the public. The question is what?
I think there's a difference between the EU allowing us to have a free port when we're a fully functioning member of the European Union, and once we were in the withdrawal agreement, if we asked for a free port and they had a veto, it was not necessarily in the EU's interest to allow us to have that advantage.
According to the House of Commons Library, if the Treasury wants to designate free ports, it can do it by statutory instrument. There's no need for a vote. It can do it just like that in 5 minutes. So it's nothing to do with the EU.
But as I come back to the point, if we've signed the withdrawal agreement, we've given the EU a veto on all of our state aid rules, including the provision of free ports. And our relationship with the European Union has changed. It's not the same as it was 5 years before the referendum. It'll never be the same again, whatever the outcome of the Brexit negotiations.
Which is what you want.
It'll be different. It'll be different. Yes. That's what we promised the people, that we would leave.
Like Boris Johnson, you too, in the past, have seemed strangely baffled about EU rules, haven't you? You told an Irish radio station last year that it was possible under the common travel area arrangements between Britain and Ireland for Britons to get passports in Ireland and the Irish to come over here and get passports. They can't. I mean, that was simply wrong, wasn't it? Why do you put out this stuff?
Well, it was an unfortunate situation. I shouldn't have done the interview. The interview was after midnight. And it was 2 or 3 days after my wife had just given birth to us. And I was a little sleep deprived and a little demob happy at that stage. I shouldn't have given the interview. I mistook that for the situation regarding to people in Northern Ireland who have the choice of taking either a British or an Irish passport. And I have apologised for that mistake.
Your suggestions that under an obscure World Trade Organization statute, Article 24, Britain can somehow avoid tariffs on its exports in the event of a no deal, you seem to be somewhat behind government thinking on this, because just 6 days ago, Michael Gove, the Minister in charge of Brexit preparation, said high EU tariffs on British exports remain the biggest challenge in a no-deal Brexit
Indeed they do,
scenario.
But that GATT 24, Article 24, is basically a 2-page agreement between the EU and the UK, which the EU have got to agree to.
Why have they got to agree to it? Well, they haven't got to agree to it at all.
Well, they haven't got to agree to it, but to make it work, they've got to agree.
Yeah,
we can't.
But you haven't got that agreement. You say it's a 2-page agreement.
No, we haven't.
You haven't got it.
No, we haven't. But
so this is pie in the sky,
but we're not
isn't
going to get that agreement while the EU think they're either going to get us to coerce us to stay in the European Union and not actually leave, or to ask for an extension, or that we would sign the withdrawal agreement, which is better for them. They're not going to face the consequences of no deal until we've sorted out our parliament. If I were the EU...
Meanwhile, they're going to charge tariffs. They treat you as a third country, and the rules and tariffs apply at the EU's borders on the day Britain leaves.
And if that's the way the EU want to play it, that's fine. It's unfortunate. It will
but that's their rules, isn't it?
In that case, then we'll we can refund all the tariffs to our exporters and pocket £12 billion a year from the European Union in excess tariffs. That's fine. If that's what the EU want to do, that's not what I'd like to do. I would like to sign GATT 24 if we don't get a deal, which I don't think we're going to. That will give us 10 years, up to 10 years of tariff and quota-free trade, as we are now, while we thrash out that detailed, comprehensive free trade deal along the lines of of the deal that the EU did with Canada. And we're far more important than Canada. We'll be a market for 17% of all EU exports.
And the deal will be far more complicated and difficult to get. Let's talk a bit about the situation of the Prime Minister now, because he's well over 20 seats short of a working majority. No power, no authority.
And those 20 seats double up, so it's 40 votes.
No power, no authority. Largest number of defeats in Parliament for a new Prime Minister.
Yep.
He's Parliament's puppet now, isn't he? Can't call an election, can't run down the clock to a no-deal Brexit.
My analysis of the situation is that I've always maintained that we have got a Remain-dominated Parliament. It's always been that situation. What actually has happened now is that with the election of Boris Johnson by the Conservative Party as the new Prime Minister, someone who is committed to get us out of the European Union by the 31st of October, we've flushed out the Remainers who are in all the parties. I don't think it's any secret. We've now in the position where
you've lost major talent, moderate talent. People, the father of the house, Ken Clarke. You've lost him. You've lost a number of people who are deeply respected and had a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience of politics, and you threw them out, which is hypocritical in itself, isn't it?
Well.
Because look at all the times that the current front bench
I think that's interesting.
Voted against Theresa May when she was Prime Minister.
I voted against the government on many occasions from the backbenches.
And you weren't thrown out.
Well, I voted against issues and policies. I voted for the referendum. I was one of the rebels on that. I voted against intervention, led the rebellion against intervention in Syria some years ago. I voted against the HS2 project every time it's come to the House.
High-speed rail.
Yep, and I voted against the withdrawal agreement on all three occasions, but I voted against specific policies. What the rebels last week did was they voted to take away the government's ability to legislate and hand it to the opposition, and they were warned prior to that vote that if they did so, they would lose the whip.
Well, let's just look at that legislation for a moment. That the law now says that if Boris Johnson doesn't get a deal by October the 19th, to ask the EU for an extension. But isn't this what you wanted? A British Parliament passing British laws with no interference from the EU. This is exactly what you wanted. Parliament is exerting its sovereign authority, isn't it?
I wish that...
You're never happy, are you?
Well, I'm not happy when Philip Hammond, one of the leading rebels on this, former Chancellor of the Exchequer only a few weeks ago, he admitted in conversation at number 10 with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson that the EU's own lawyers helped to draft that legislation, and the sting in the tail.
It doesn't matter who helped to draft it, does it?
Well, I think it says a lot as whose interests some of our members are working, and the sting in the tail of that legislation.
It's still legislation, and apparently some people in your party don't believe he's bound by it.
Well, I
can refuse Parliament's instructions.
Well, I think it's against the constitution of our country. We have a system where
it's a law. It's received royal assent.
It is, but the way it was delivered.
It doesn't matter. It's voted in. It's law. It received royal assent. It's on the statute.
We have a system. Well, I think it should be tested in court. We have a system whereby the government of the day brings forward legislation, which the House either approves or votes down. It may be amended, and then it goes on the statute book. And at the next general election, the government will be held responsible for the legislation it has passed. We're now in the perverse situation with the connivance of John Bercow, the Speaker. We're in a situation where government legislation is being passed onto the statute book, which the government neither proposed and indeed opposed.
It doesn't matter. There are lots of laws on the statute book that the government hasn't proposed or sponsored.
Many of them wouldn't have got royal assent.
Hundreds of laws. I mean, what are you suggesting? That he breaks the law?
I'm not suggesting that he breaks the law.
Because that would be anarchy.
It would set a very dangerous precedent. But I mean, the appetite, democracy's appetite for martyrs is insatiable.
And your Brexiteers' appetite for martyrs as well. We had Ian Duncan Smith, former Tory leader, saying the Prime Minister should be willing to be and would be seen as a Brexit martyr. So now it's something glorious to break the law in Britain? What do you think that would do to Britain's international reputation if the Prime Minister started trashing laws and trashing the rule of law?
I think
What do you think it would do?
I think it would be a retrograde step. I'd rather take a legal challenge to the law, and I think.
And if it goes to the Supreme Court after that, and they tell him to obey the law,
well, then
he should.
Then if the Supreme Court says he should, then he should. But there are other ways around it, and they've been well publicised. He may write other letters. He may send a letter saying he wants he's been told to ask for an extension to Article 50. And he may write a side letter.
That would look really good. He sends one letter saying, I can't do this.
No,
I want an extension, and the other one saying I don't. That makes a nonsense.
He will
of the
never.
whole process.
I promise you one thing, Tim. He'll never say I want an extension. He may say I have been commanded by Parliament to ask for an extension. However, I think there's no doubt he doesn't want an extension. And what will this extension achieve? What is another 3 months going to achieve? And the sting in the tail of that legislation that was passed, helped to be drafted by the European Union's lawyers,
it avoids a no-deal Brexit, which a lot of people in this country don't want.
He who fights and runs away only lives to run away another day. What's going to happen on the 31st of December? And the real stinger in the tail of that legislation is, in the final paragraph, it says that the Prime Minister is ordered to ask for an extension until the 31st of January. 3-month extension. However, if the European Union will not accept the 31st of January and offer an alternative date for extension, that the Prime Minister only has 48 hours to accept that date. What if, I'll put it to you,
he's a quick thinker, he can manage that.
What if the European Union come back and say, look, we've had enough of this. We've had extension after extension, these short extensions. The UK can't get its act together. 5 years. And then we've been in a situation where probably nearly 9 years after the referendum, we haven't implemented the will of the people as expressed at that referendum.
Well,
this is going to be so damaging for our democracy.
Let's talk about the will of the people, because you blame the Remain MPs in Parliament for the mess Britain's in. You said last week, democracy only works when the losers accept the result, and they've gone against the will of the British people. I know it's always useful to blame somebody else when things go wrong, but the fact is, if it hadn't been for the unbridgeable divisions inside your party and the 3 years that your party has wasted bickering and fighting with itself, the will of the people would have been delivered by now. Theresa May had a deal. Wasn't perfect, but it would have delivered Brexit.
In name only.
Not according to Jacob Rees-Mogg. It would have given you your independence.
Well, I think he'd argue
and the
something
polls
rather
at the
different.
time showed people wanted it. March the 29th, YouGov poll. Leave voters wanted to see that deal pass by 49% to 30%. Conservative voters wanted it by an even higher margin, by 57% to 24%. But you knew better. And your own interests predominated, as they have throughout this process.
I would suggest that the overwhelming majority of those people had never actually read the withdrawal agreement full, never even read the legal briefings on the withdrawal agreement, and they were damning. Theresa May was tasked to go and
they wanted a deal. It doesn't matter whether they read it.
And when they saw the deal they'd got, it wouldn't have taken very long at all before a huge amount of dissatisfaction, not then with the European Union, who'd forced the deal on Theresa May, but on us for voting for it. And I promise you, Tim, whatever happens, I am not signing that withdrawal agreement. I will not betray my country or my electorate, because they haven't got time to read it, and I will not sign it.
If your party, Mr.
Not in my name.
If your party had really been interested in delivering the result of the referendum, Theresa May would have recognised the differences amongst MPs in Parliament and sought straight away to work out a deal that could pass through Parliament. She had a majority. She briefly had some authority. She could have started cross-party talks immediately, but she waited 2.5 years before doing that. It's your failure. You blame the Remain MP. It's the failure of your party and your Conservative government.
I think Theresa May, unfortunately, will carry a lot of the blame for this. I never voted for her as leader, and I was actually the first MP to say that she should go, which was on the Saturday after she launched the Chequers proposals, when it was clear that that was not delivering on our manifesto to lead the single market, the customs union, jurisdiction, European courts, take back control of our money, our borders and our laws. And I'm disappointed that we had an opportunity in December of last year, the vote of confidence, where 200 of my colleagues did have confidence in her, so she stayed on. I don't know what they thought, with things going to get better. The clock has been run down. has been run down and left Boris Johnson with very, very few options.
The clock was run down by Brexiteer ministers who were in positions of authority. David Davis, Liam Fox, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson. Brexit supporting ministers in key jobs, and they failed to get it done. Many of the people who are now sitting on your government front bench.
What David Davis did fail to do was realise that Theresa May was running parallel negotiations through his own office using his own civil servants, and then presented him 2 days before Chequers with a fait accompli that you're working on a super Canada deal, but this is what we're going to go with.
David Davis didn't know the first thing about the European Union. This is what he said. Within minutes of a vote for Brexit, the CEOs of Mercedes, BMW, VW and Audi will be knocking on Merkel's door demanding there be no barriers to the British market. Didn't happen.
I think
they said it was going to be the easiest deal in history. Didn't happen. Well, they said all the cards were going to be in Britain's hands. Didn't happen. This was nonsense, wasn't it? Project fantasy.
No, what we've got is we do still have some semblance of democracy in this country, whereby people who are dissatisfied with what the government's doing come and lobby me. I lobby the Prime Minister. They'd lobby the Prime Minister directly. Due to the democratic deficit in the European Union, we're trading with Germany, France and all the other EU countries, but they've given the powers of these negotiations to another body called the European Union, and it's what it wants to get out of these negotiations is going to be different to what our customers in those countries want to get. And there is a huge democratic deficit. The people making the big decisions in the European Union are not elected and not politically accountable.
Well, a lot of them are elected, and a lot of them are. We've just had the largest democratic vote is for the European Parliament.
Yes, and the largest
400 million people,
and the largest party elected to that Parliament is the Brexit Party.
You unhappy with that? There's democracy for you.
That's democracy.
There's democracy.
Well, I would have been very unhappy had we pulled the Prime Minister, then Theresa May, pulled the European elections because we weren't going to do very well in them. That would have been wrong, and I made that very clear.
Mr. Bridgen, when you look around this country, you can't fail to see people getting angrier, more divided, more bitter. Demonstrations are getting angrier. Yep. You like it that way? The country divided, full of hatred, invective?
No, not at all.
But that's what your resistance to a deal has produced, isn't it?
No, it's the resistance to leaving. As I said, the democracy only works.
You had a deal, you could have left. You would have been out by now.
It was a very, very bad deal, and it would have...
It was a deal.
I don't think we ever would have got out of the backstop. I think that was the end state that the EU got in mind for our country. And they would have had a veto. At least in the Article 50 process, we can actually leave while we're in it, however long we extend it, and however unpopular it is with our electorate. Once we'd signed that withdrawal agreement, the EU would have a veto on when we could actually get out of that treaty. And I do think the country can come back together. But one thing for sure, Tim...
How is it going to come back together when
it
is so deeply divided?
When we actually leave...
You have a situation now where anyone who contradicts the government line is belittled and insulted. You take the doctor, David Nicholl, who contributed to the government's contingency plan for a no-deal exit. He dared to share his concerns about the government's inability to stockpile medicines, and he was told to be ashamed of himself, and he was fear-mongering. He was obviously good enough to contribute to the government's
but Tim, you'll
work
know
on this. What a wonderful precedent for a free society, isn't it? He didn't tell you what you wanted to hear, so he was fear-mongering.
Well, I'll tell you what is going on. The liberal elite in this country have never lost a serious political battle in history.
He wasn't a liberal elite.
They've lost this one, and they'll use every means at their disposal to achieve their aims. He's not leave the European Union.
He was talking about people who might actually lose their life because they haven't got the medicines they need. Are you prepared to risk lives in this grand project of yours?
That is pure project fear. That contingency
no, it's not project fear.
Well, Tim,
these are experts who are pointing out that there is a huge risk here. My question to you...
X is a has-been and a spurt is a drip under pressure.
My question to you is, are you prepared to risk lives in this project? Are you?
There is
it's
always...
a very simple question, yes or no?
Well, are the European Union willing to risk lives?
I'm asking you the question. We'll put the question to the EU. I'm asking you.
Well,
are you prepared to risk lives? You won't give me an answer on that.
We're the second biggest pharmaceutical industry in our country, in the world, only bigger by America.
And you get 36 million packs of medicine from the EU every month.
What about so if it's so it's a big deal?
But
please
answer the question.
Please
answer the question. Are you prepared to risk lives? For this project of yours?
I will do nothing that risks lives. We will not interfere with the massive amount of drugs that are manufactured in this country that are used by people on the continent. We're not threatening their lives. It would appear that the EU are threatening lives of people in my country. And I think the EU have misjudged the British character.
There's no threat. They're talking about non-frictionless trade
and Tim,
that will result
the day
from
after,
the measures that are taken.
We're in the European Union.
In the no deal
we've got complete regulatory equivalence with the European. We're in the European Union. At 1 minute past 11 when we leave, those goods were manufactured while we were in the European Union. What's the difference between those goods the minute before we left and the minute after we left, the day after we left? What extra checks would you like on those goods?
You're a third country, and you know that they're going to put tariffs on it. We've already been through that.
When's there ever been a third country that has actually got exactly full regulatory equivalence? It'll probably be a year or 18 months.
It isn't a common sense arrangement. It's a legal order.
The EU. What extra checks do they need on the goods?
It's a legal order. It's a legal order.
Well, on the WTO,
you seem to think they just make it up on the hoof.
Yeah, but there's never been two countries trading as third parties with full regulatory equivalence. This is unique in history.
Right.
Under WTO rules,
we're running out of
it's
time.
a non-tariff barrier to put extra checks. What extra checks do you want?
Thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.